Good morning, class. So, our discussion for today is we will talk about non-financial liabilities, provisions, and contingencies. So, already we have tapos na tayo sa assets. So, we are going to discuss liabilities na. So, first of this is I think the financial liabilities, and then after the financial liabilities, non-financial liabilities na yung topic. So, ito na yun. Okay. So, sa non-financial liabilities, we will talk about provisions and mostly contingencies. Okay. So, what is provision? So, provision is a present obligation of uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, dito, we have present obligation. At the same time, there is a probable economic outflow of the entity. So, in short, may babayaran si entity, guys, because of this present obligation, and it must be measurable. So, yeah. So, of uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, recognition, there must be a present obligation. Okay. So, this is under PAS 37, paragraph 14. So, present obligation as a result of a past event. So, dapat may nangyari muna before obligation. And then, it is probable that an outflow of economic benefits shall be required to settle obligation. So, we say probable, there is a really high chance to pay, magbabayad si entity. Okay? And that is the obligation is measurable. So, the amount of the obligation can be measured reliably. So, ito yung tatlo. In order to recognize the provision. So, what are the characteristics of the obligation? So, for the first one, okay, so it arises from past events. So, that it signifies or manifested as obligatory events. So, ito yung dalawang events. It's either coming from a legal obligation or constructive obligation due to entity's action. Okay. So, sa legal obligation, pwede, let's say, nakasunog sila. No? Yun. Or, base sa kontrata, if hindi pasok sa kanilang standards, magbabayad sila ng ganitong fees. So, that is an example of legal obligation. So, the entity has indicated to other parties that it will accept certain responsibilities by a reason of an established pattern of past practice pag sa constructive obligation. So, dito sa constructive obligation, guys, wala namang kontrata or law na nagsasaad that they are liable. Walang law or contract that are saying na they are liable to pay this obligation. But, it is established pattern of past practice or published policy or sufficiently specific current statement. So, and as a result, the entity has created a valid expectation on the part of the other parties that it will discharge those responsibilities. So constructive yun siya. Okay, let's say na pag may tawag nito, later on may mga examples tayo. Sige. So, recognition, there must be a present, probable, and measurable. Kanina, present obligation. So, ito yan. Saan galing yung present obligation? Again, it arises from past event. So, it's either legal or constructive obligation. So, due to entities action. So, siguro, nakagalian na, for example, na ma-delay na yung once, ito, no? Classic example is yung sa Pizza Hut man yata. Once ma-delay yung delivery ng pizza, it will be served as free. Magiging free yun. Kasi that is according sa kanilang published policy. No? Sa kanilang past practice. Or, let's say, dyan sa may sa 24 chicken. No? Kakabili ko lang ng 24 chicken dyan sa Lapu-Lapu. So, doon, may nakasaad doon sa kanilang window screen that pag hindi mag-issue ng receipt si cashier, magiging free na lang yung chicken na binili mo. So, yun. So, that is constructive obligation. So, according sa kanilang published policy. Yan. While yung isa sa legal obligation, for example, manufacture kayo ng chemicals, and then let's say nga nag-spill or nakasira kayo sa environment, so you are really obliged to pay, or to rehab sa mga nasira ninyo. So that is accordance with the law, or pwede naman pag-contract. Okay. So next one would be the probable. How do we measure the probability? So when say probable, medyo vague siya. So we need to quantify the probable na word. So ito yung under the US GAAP, the probable. So pag more than 95% yung likelihood of occurrence, it signifies that the outcome is virtually certain. Virtually certain, you are quite very sure. So, magre-recognize ba tayo ng liability? The answer is yes. So, sa books or sa liability portion, we would recognize provision. Pag liability, again, in contrary nito, is an asset, di ba? Pwede naman you have an contingent asset. Sa contingent asset, pag more than 95% pa rin, magre-recognize ng asset. If you have, for example, guys, ito yung scenario. Sa liability kasi, pag kamuang na ay kaso, if you are the defendant of such case, pwede kayo yung magre-recognize ng damages or babayarang damages. So, provision. Pero, what if kayo yung plaintiff? What if kayo yung plaintiff or nagkaso, then nanalo kayo sa case? So, kayo yung tatanggap ng damages or magre-recognize ng contingent asset. So, it's just a mirror. Yan, mirror lang to siya. Okay, let's proceed. What if, sir, the likelihood is 51 to 95%? So, the outcome would be probable. Ito yung probable. But still, even though 51 to 95% yung likelihood of, or the probability, so magre-recognize pa rin tayo ng provision. Mag-a-accrue. So, makita ba siya sa books? Makitaan ba siya sa liability portion? The answer is yes. Kaya nga, mag-a-accrue, di ba? Accrue. While the asset, contingent asset, is i-disclose lang sa notes to financial state. Okay. So what if the probability of likelihood or the likelihood is 20 to 50%? Well, the outcome would be possible. So that is equivalent to possible. So sa contingent liability, which is our topic, i-disclose lang siya sa notes to financial statement. While yung asset, it is ignored. So, pag below 20%, so the outcome is remote. Say remote, more likely na hindi mangyayari. So, para siyang virtually certain na hindi mangyayari. Yan. So, therefore, the liability is ignored. So, ano yung gagawin, sir? Mag-a-accrue ba sa FS? Magsulat ba o mag-accrue ba tayo ng provision sa FS? The answer is no. Sir, how about magdi-disclose tayo sa FS? Again, the answer is no. Kasi the outcome is remote. So, ignore nyo lang yung provision. Or ignored in case of asset. Okay. So, sa virtually certain, you are quite sure. Very sure that there is a probability of economic outflow of the entity. While yung sa probable, lamang siya na mangyayari kaysa hindi mangyayari. Okay? So, sa possible, lamang na hindi siya para siyang ganun. Mas lamang siyang hindi mangyayari kasi mangyayari. While yung remote is more likely na hindi siya mangyayari. Walang economic outflow. A very low chance. So, tapos na tayo sa present obligation. Again, coming from it's either, legal or contract or pwede sa past practice. Constructive obligation. While yung sa probable, ito yun siya. Okay, how to measure the probability. So, kasi since pag dapat 51% and above to recognize that there is a provision. Yan. Kasi provision yung topic natin. So, it must be 51% and above yung likelihood. Then, dito na tayo sa measurable. How do we measure? Kasi since if the provision is hindi ma-measure, we could not recognize provision. So, sa measurement, okay, so, based standard, it would be the best estimate. As a general rule, it is the most likely outcome. Ito yun siya. So, pero may exception. Again, as a general rule, the most likely outcome. Let's say, sinabi ng legal lawyer or the legal counsel that the amount of provision is 1 million based sa kanilang most likely outcome estimates. So, yung 1 million yung isusulat natin sa books. Pero may mga exceptions. So, let's say large population of distribution. So, that is the probability. So, yung gagamitin is expected value or weighted average value or amount. Yeah. So, later on, isa-isa natin itong i-discuss. And then yung isa, range of possibility. So, let's say your provision is from 500 million to 100 million. Ganun. Or, hindi pala. Let's say the obligation is 500,000 to 1 million. So, the midpoint of there. So, I think it's 7.5. Ganun. So, next is other measurement considerations. So, pag may risk and uncertainty, so, yung na-compute natin provision kanina, i-multiply pa natin sa risk adjustment factor. Kasi may involvement na ng risk and uncertainty. Okay, just consider that one. And also, ipa-present value ba, sir? If the discounting is material. Let's say that mabayaran yung obligation after 5 years. So, that is already more than 1 year. So, we need to recognize the time value of money. So, magpa-present value na tayo. Okay. So, next, pag future events that can affect the estimated liability. So, pag may sufficient and objective events. So, yeah. Then next, expected disposal of assets is not considered in computing provision. So, ito yung general rule. Ano yung journal entry? Magde-debit tayo ng malamang loss or expense account. Yan. We debit expense or loss and then we credit liability in recording the provision or the liability. And then may exception tayo to the rule. So, directly attributable cost of an asset. For example, yung first bullet point, there is a decommissioning liability of the wasting asset. Tapos na tayo nito, guys, di ba? Sa last discussion natin sa wasting asset. So, yung decommissioning or para siyang dismantling. So, we need to debit asset and then credit tayo ng for example dito, decommissioning liability or restoration cost for the wasting asset and dismantling cost. Ito yung journal entry niya. Instead of expense or loss, magde-debit tayo ng asset. Kuha. Sige. Types of provisions. Let me check muna yung recordings if nagre-record pa. Sige. So, types of provisions, isa-isahin natin. Lawsuits or court cases, yung mga kaso-kaso. Yan. Present obligation arises when? Kailan? kapag nag-file na ba ng kaso, doon ba magre-recognize si entity ng provision or uh, liability? Again, the answer is no. No? Magre-record si entity when upon inflicting damage or harm sa um, damage party, no? Or yung inflicted party. So that is the time magre-recognize ng obligation si entity. No? Dili kay kung kanusa siya nag-file og kaso ang kalaban. Okay. The second one, premiums liability. No? So upon sale. No? So ito later on sa premiums, for example, um, so every so let's say sa Magnum, for every stick na siya discount for another sale. So yun yung mga premiums liability. So upon sale. And then warranty liability upon sale pa rin. Okay. Then guarantee, no, pag default of party guaranteed. So dito, you are no, secondary liable. What if hindi makakabayad yung ginarantee ninyo? Well, kayo yung magbabayad sa kanila in behalf sa kanya. So yan. Or para siyang ikaw yung co-maker, no? Para kang co-maker ng utang. So yan. Kung magde-default yun siya, malamang si creditor is mag-go after sa guarantor. Yeah. Then, decommissioning liability, it arises when the provision of law and contract arises also. Okay. Then, restructuring liability. No? So, later on, mag-discuss tayo dito. Pag may detailed formal plan na yung company or may valid expectations na sa mga employee. Sige. So, please remember this one. Okay. This is really important. So, lagyan natin to ng star. Okay. So, pag provision, how likely to happen? Pag probable, yung tawag nito. Pag, yung 51 to 95%, yan. So, pag 51 to 95% or 51% and above, so magre-recognize na yung provision. Kasi pag below than that, magre-recognize lang tayo ng contingent liability. So when it is contingent liability, you have to do is just to disclose this to the notes to financial statement. Okay. Yan. Below are probable but more than remote. Kasi pag remote, disregard mo lang. Can the amount be measured reliably? No? Pag provision, malamang, yes. Kasi pag contingent liability, no. How about sa financial reporting? It recognized as liability in the balance sheet plus matching disclosure in the notes to FS. While the contingent liability, hindi mo siya makakita sa balance sheet. No? The contingent liability is hindi makikita sa balance sheet kasi you just need to disclose it in the notes. No? Okay. Next, illustration. Here, dito. So, you have to recognize if meron bang present obligation yung entity. Okay. So, Villar Company is currently operating a mine in Davao. On a routine safety inspection, it was found that there is a very high chance that toxic chemicals might spill. Okay, this ito yun. It was found out that there is a very high chance, that the toxic chemicals might spill into the nearby river. And then there is a law, it's either by law, diba? May legal, no? O coming from legal obligation, no? There is a law requiring mining entities to clean up any environmental damage. So yung question is, does the company have a present obligation? Okay. I will give you 2 seconds. 1, 2. So meron ba? The answer is no. Wala. Nga naman, sir. Kasi it was found out that there is a very high chance. Pero hindi ibig sabihin meron ng past obligation. Again, dapat may past or present obligation. So, ang the answer of this one, there is no obligating event. No, wala naman silang liability since there is no actual environmental damage from the company's mining operations. No actual spilling of toxic chemicals. Pero sabi ngayon lang na there's a very high chance. Pero wala namang pass or obligating event. So consequently, the company does not have an obligation. So yun. Nakuha. Okay, illustration 2. Sabada company operates a domestic fleet of cargo ships. No? So yan yung operation niya. And the ships are periodically maintained due to relevant regulations. So strict yung regulations daw since this is a airline company or domestic fleet. Ano pala? Hindi pala airline. Cargo ships pala. So under marina, where there is a tough penalty to be imposed in case one of the ships ran aground and caused an oil spill. So during the year, one of the ships sank and caused a major oil spill. So meron nang nangyari, di ba? So I think alam niyo na yung sagot. Meron nang nangyari, may past or present event. So, present obligation. So does the company have a present obligation? Again, the answer is yes. There is already an obligating event. So since the actual happening of the oil spill, thus the company has already an obligation. Okay. Ano to sa illustration 1, sir? There is a very high chance pero wala pang nangyari. But dito, meron na talagang nangyari, no? One of the ships sank and caused a major oil spill. So because of that, may babayarang penalty si si vessel company. Illustration 3, during the year, a new regulation required airline companies, including Labrador Company, to refurbish their aircraft every 4 years. So the question is, does the company have a present obligation? Yan. So i-require daw silang mag-refurbish every 4 years. Yan. So the answer is, even though there is a legal requirement for the refurbishment, the company has a choice not to refurbish its aircraft. So wala pang obligation. Kasi may choice naman si company to buy a new one instead. So as a result, the company has no obligation for refurbishment. Pero let's say, however, if the authorities found out that the company is using its fleet of aircraft that is not refurbished or hindi bago, so meron na silang obligating event, there is now obligation to pay for the penalties. Mura ragon na siya god guys kana, for example sa LTO. So kailan ba mag-a-arise na? Let's say mag-a-arise yung obligation nga magbayad ka o penalty. For example, madakpan ka sa LTO kaya wala ka hindi registered yung vehicle mo o yung mga motor, hindi siya registered. So pag every 1 year gina-require ka sa government or ni LTO to register your vehicle, motor vehicle or vehicle. So tapos madakpan ka, so to the point na sa point na madakpan ka, ito yun na yung obligating event. So meron ka ng obligation to pay for the penalties. The same scenario dito sa illustration 3. Okay. Illustration 4, this one, let's answer isa-isa. So, si Ron Keeling Company became involved in court case, so may kaso involving the alleged health hazards caused by one of its cosmetic products. Siguro, lipstick siguro ni, and then pag-ibutang sa wait, mudako. Yan. Then, nagkakause ng health hazards na. Cancer ng lips. So, the lawyers involved in the same kind of litigation were consulted and gave their estimate of the likelihood that the company may win or lose the case. So, under each of the following independent scenarios, determine whether there is a probable outflow. Sige, kayo yung decide if may probable outflow ba of resources or not. Say probable, magre-recognize pa tayo ng provision or magdi-disclose lang sa notes, or i-ignore na lang natin. Okay? Sa first one, 90% that the entity will lose the case. So again, there is a virtually, tama ba? Or meron tayong um, provision dito. Kasi, saan ngayon siya? This one. Ito. Since it is probable, no? So, 51 to 95, probable yan. Okay? So, na yan. So, dito, meron tayong provision since more than probable yung uh, yung verdict. This one, there is a 60% chance that the entity will lose the case. So, ganito lang guys. Pag more than 51%, yan lang yung framework niyo. More than 51%, magre-recognize tayo ng provision. Okay. So, this one, there is a 40% chance that the entity will lose the case. Hindi naman siya 51% and above. So, therefore, this one, contingent liability na. So, pag contingent liability, you just need to disclose to the notes to financial statements. Sa fourth one, there is a 30% chance that the entity will, again, yung word dito na from lose, dito, lose, this one is win. So, pila ang chance of losing? 70% chance of losing. So, therefore, magre-recognize tayo ng provision kasi more than 51%. So, ito yung answer. 90%. Yan. Provision. Magre-recognize ng provision. May liability tayo sa balance sheet. Then, yung sa scenario 2, 60%. So, again, pag more than 51%, magre-recognize ng provision. This one, 40%, not more than 51%. So, yung verdict dyan, there is no probable. No? So, contingent liability lang. Kasi yung 40% under the bracket of possible lang. No? There is possibility lang. So, provision, siya. Sa notes to FS lang tayo dito. And then this one, sabi kasi niya, there is a 30% chance of winning. So, 70% chance of losing. So, yung probability lang kasi is 100%. So, there is a probable outflow. So, magre-recognize tayo ng provision kasi more than 51%. Okay. Illustration 5. So, for example, if hindi po pa na-gets, no? You may post this video and then you may answer yan. Okay. So, recently, Panes company became involved in a lawsuit involving alleged company's maltreatment of its employees. So, merong employee na nag-file ng kaso to Panes company. Kasi due to maltreatment daw. So, based on the lawyer's advice, the best estimate for the amounts of that entity may be liable to is 2.5 million. And that it is a probable that company may held liable. So, yan. So, ano yung mga keyword dito? So, based sa meron bang tawag ito? Ito, balik tayo dito. Meron bang present obligation? Meron bang probability or probable that the outflow shall be required to settle obligation? Or is it measurable? So, let's isa-isahin natin. So, dito. May present obligation ba? Yes. No? Not because the employee have filed a case, but again, siguro, before pa nag-file of case, meron ng damage to the employee. Yan. So, meron ba present obligation? The answer is yes. Is it probable? Sabi sa attorney or lawyer, it is probable. So, magre-recognize ng provision. Is it measurable? So, yes, the amount is 2.5 million. So, under each of the following independent scenarios, A and B, determine the initial measurement of the provision. So, what if the settlement is expected to happen within 8 months? Therefore, hindi tayo magdi-discounting dito. Or we will not consider the time value of money. So, the 8% relevant discount rate is no effect of the scenario A. While yung sa scenario B, since yung settlement is expected to happen after 2 years, so more than 1 year, therefore, magpe-present value na tayo dito. Okay. So, sa scenario A, okay, so the provision shall be measured at nominal amount 2.5 million lang. So, that is the answer. Regarding the measurement of the provision, 2.5 million lang. Pero sir, what if more than 2 years? So, PV of 1. So, the PV factor of 8% for 2 periods is 8.85, 7339 times multiply natin sa cash flows. Yun, isang bagsakan lang, lump sum. So, the initial measurement would be 2,143,347. Next, illustration 6. Yan. So, during the year, a court case was filed against Cristobal Company, and the case is for alleged explosions of smartphones that the company is currently selling. So, meron ng past event, may explosion ng smartphones. So, nag-file ng kaso yung mga customer. No? So, for this, plaintiff o yung mga customer na bumili ng smartphones, it was alleged that the explosion caused by physical injuries. So, may inflict or damage or harm. So, even though hindi pa nag-file, dapat mag-recognize na si entity ng provision or liability since nag-inflict na ng harm. So, according to company's lawyers or legal counsel, the amount that may be paid to the plaintiff sa mga customer is 4 million. Ito yung best estimate nila. And the court is expected to make a decision within the year. So, yan. So walang time value of money involved. So, determine the initial measure of provision if there is any. So, first one, there is a 70% chance that the company will lose the case. So, yeah, more than 51%. So, we will recognize provision. Letter B, there is a 55% chance that the company will lose the case. So, there is a provision since it is more than 51%. While in letter C, there is a 40% chance that the company will lose the case. So, magre-recognize tayo ng what? Contingent liability sa notes to FS lang. So, sa illustration 6, we will now use the expected value method. Ganito yung pag-solve. So, since 70% chance of losing, so there is a 30% chance of winning. So, how to solve that one? So, first scenario, 70% chance of losing, 4 million times 70%. Yan. So, that is 2.8. So, wala namang amount what if panalo yung case. So, that is 0 times 30% lang. So, how about if 55% chance, so 4 million times 55%, that is 2.2. So, wala namang amount for winning. No, yan. Then, amount of provision is none. So, dito sa scenario 3, magkano yun? 40% chance lang. So, notes to financial statements lang. So, no present value calculation since the amount is expected to be paid within 1 year. Okay. Illustration 7. Dito, what if may risk adjustment factor na? So, magka-compute again tayo ng expected value. Okay. So, product company became involved in litigation as one of its delivery trucks was involved in a road accident resulting to multiple physical injuries and damage to properties. So, si product company yung liable. So, according to the lawyers consulted by product company, there is an 80% chance that the company will become liable. So, 80% chance. So, a very high chance. So, if that's the case, magre-recognize na si Prado Company ng provision kasi more than 51%. So, in case that the company is ordered by the court to pay damage, the following amounts and their corresponding probability are estimated. So, yung amount is 2 million. The probability of paying 2 million is 35%. the probability of paying 3 million is 45%, and the probability of paying 5 million is 20%. So 35 plus 45 plus 20%, that is 100% probability. So each probability, ito yung amount. So how much would be the estimated amount of provision? So dyan muna tayo sa question letter A. So yung estimated amount of provision is 2,440,000. So giunsa na siya, sir. Giunsa. So again, dito tayo. So dito tayo sa right corner. Yan. Sabi nga, di ba? There is an 35% chance of paying 2 million. So 2 million times 35%. Yan. And then 3 million times 45%. Yan. And then 5 million times 20%. So i-add mo lahat. So the total is 3,050,000 again. 2 million times 35% plus 3 million times 45% plus 5 million times 20%. That is 3,050,000. Okay. Asat kagikan ani sir? Eto. Based sa lawyer. Eto. Based sa lawyer. Ito yung mga amounts. So, that is 3,050,000. Then, i-multiply pa natin sa 80% chance of losing. So, ito yun. 80% chance is losing. 20% chance is winning. So, sa 20%, wala namang value binigay. So, 0. While yung sa 80% chance of losing, this is the amount, 3,050,000. So, 3,050,000 times 80% plus 0 times 20%. So, I think that is 0 naman. So, therefore, that is 2,440,000. So, before the risk adjustment factor. Pero let's consider what if my risk adjusted factor. So, 2,440 times 1.06. That would be 2,586,400. If the estimated risk adjustment factor is 6%. May binigay pa kanina sa case B. So, if the risk adjustment factor is estimated to be 6%, how much would be the estimated amount of provision? So, i-multiply mo lang na compute mo dito, 2,440 times 1.06. Again, 2,440 times 1.06 kasi 6% yung risk adjustment factor. So, the amount would be 2,586,400. So, that is under expected value method. No? May mga methods naman kanina, di ba? So, yeah. Ito yun. Expected value or weighted average value method. No? Some measurement. Then, next one, problems would be mga midpoint. No? How do we solve the midpoint? Ito yung mas madali lang. Midpoint.